right, I'm going to start the broadcast in just a moment.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Laura DeNardis, the Interim Dean of the School of Communication at American University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this special event featuring author and BBC journalist John Sopel on his new book, UnPresidented: Politics, Pandemics, and the Race That Trumped All Others. I'm very eager to hear more about his stunning experiences as a reporter on the presidential campaign and election in 2020. Now, complicating this election, in addition to the pandemic, protests, polarization, and so much else, were heightened battles around digital media, the circulation of disinformation in social media, ongoing questions about foreign election interference attempts, the amplification of conspiracy theories, violent extremism, threats against journalists, and even the question of when a sitting American president can be blocked on social media. Let me just say, what a time to be a journalist around the world. Now, John, I want to mention to you that so many of our journalism students are attending this event this evening, and this past election year has been extraordinary for them also. Students worked on election-related investigations at the Washington Post in our course that's called the Washington Post Practicum, under the supervision of our faculty member, John Sullivan. They traveled to 2 primary states to cover the elections in the presidential primaries class. And COVID didn't stop them from tackling breaking news stories, in some cases from their living rooms, just like working journalists do. Supreme Court hearings, no problem. They filed on deadline, just like everyone else. It really has been incredible. Now, some of our students worked on, with one of our professors, Sherry Williams, launching Vision 2020, election stories from the Next Generation project in partnership with The Nation magazine that tried to magnify concerns of young voters from diverse experiences and backgrounds. So they've been on track with you and very much involved in this. And we're still counting, but at least a half dozen AU alums are right now in the White House press corps. So 5 of them from the School of Communication. We're really excited about that. They are thrilled, as well as all of our participants tonight. And thank you all for joining us. We're thrilled to have John here to share his experiences. The School of Communication is delighted to be co-hosting this event with the Science Institute of Policy and Politics at American University. And moderating tonight's discussion is American University's very own Amy Dacey, the Executive Director of the Science Institute. And Amy, I'd like to introduce you if I may. Amy is no stranger to campaigning and elections, having served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Democratic National Committee during the 2016 presidential election. She worked for then Senator John Kerry on his presidential campaign in 2004 and has had a host of leadership positions, too numerous to mention, but I'll just mention one, the executive director of Emily's List, the organization that is dedicated to electing Democratic women to public office. So we're just so thrilled to have her at American University. And I ask you to help me welcome Amy Dacey, who will moderate this event and introduce our wonderful speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nardis. We're so happy that you're here with us today. It's been such a great partnership with the School of Communications. And of course, as always, it's great to hear what our students are doing, on campus. It was definitely quite the year. I know that John has covered so many elections. He has been the BBC's North American editor since 2014, and he's covered the 2016 and 2020 elections and the Trump White House. So his perspective has been so, incredible. He's also written several other books on elections and ones that have mattered. We're going to certainly dig deep in today into his most recent book. And please go to the chat. We have information if you haven't gotten the book yet. Unprecedented. It's incredible. Can you tell? I did read it, John. I took a few minutes to mark important moments to talk about. It was incredible. And Dr. Donardis, you can appreciate as well, this was an incredible piece of work to go back and talk about such an incredible election year. It was a little tough to read, John, because it was literally going through a diary that you had of a day-to-day what was happening in this year. And things came back to me that I was like, did that also happen in 2020? It was unbelievable. So we are so grateful to have you here to get your perspective. I certainly want to start out and talk a little bit about the book and how it's set up. I mean, the book covers the time period of June 18th, 2019 to November 7th of 2020. As you mentioned, that's 503 days before, as you call it, polling day, or as we call it, election day. I think it was geared, certainly toward observers in London and England. A lot of it's written for consuming, in that country to know more about our elections. And it brings us a perspective from both sides of the pond. And I think in an interesting way, this was really set up as an election diary, but so much of this was about the administration and the incredible, unprecedented things that were happening. I just want to first start by welcoming you and getting your general observations. When we start, on June 18th, there's no global pandemic. I think the economy is doing not well for everyone, but certainly in a way, looked at by a strength by the Trump administration. The social unrest we saw later in the next summer had not started. It was a very different world, I think, in June 18th. And so what were your expectations when you started writing this book and were thinking about how you were going to document a presidential election year?
Amy, it's a great opening question. I just want to say thank you, all of you, for tuning into this. In London, which is where I'm actually in London at the moment, so it's quite late at night here. In London, you have no other options because all the pubs are shut, all the bars are closed, the restaurants. Britain is in lockdown, whereas you have options in DC. So thank you very much indeed for being part of this. I mean, the book was conceived with my publisher and a literary agent, and they said, why don't you do a diary of the election? And I thought it would all be planes, trains, and automobiles of endless kind of regional airports in Des Moines late at night, trying to get to New Hampshire or trying to get to South Carolina or then getting to Nevada and then Super Tuesday. And it would be that sort of book that would unfold. And of course, it turned out to be a very different book than I'd intended to write. It became much more personal because suddenly my wife had to move back to London because she's got a very, very elderly mother. My son lives in Australia because he's married an Australian. And suddenly everything is dislocated and all the wiring that keeps the world together has been ripped from the wall. And you can't move around, and the pandemic has come in and it upends everything. And in Orlando, where Donald Trump launched his presidential re-election bid in 2019, the world seemed set fair for him. The economy was doing pretty well. Approval ratings were never high for him. People were spending money again. Tax cuts, yes, they disproportionately helped the very wealthy, but some money was coming through. There was a growing confidence on Main Street, and to an awful lot of his supporters, whether you liked what he was offering or not, he sort of had stuck to his word. He had started building a wall. He was keeping immigrants out. He was making it much more difficult for Muslims to get into the country. He sort of was bringing back manufacturing, but not in the way that it was hyped. And, you know, he was looking like he'd made a big down payment on what he pledged the American people in 2016. And I thought it's going to take someone absolutely formidable to beat him. And he looked very, very strong indeed. And as you say, Amy, the book is written as a diary. And there were bits where I kind of make massive misjudgments about the significance I attach to certain events and think, can I go back and rewrite that to make myself look really, really clever and just so prescient and so smart? And I thought, no, I can't do that. The rules are that I write as I see it.